Part 1. When my ex texted, "You're invited. Bring a +1 if you want." I stared at the screen for a full minute, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. Just the address of a vineyard outside the city, a dress code that screamed money, and a date circled in my calendar like a dare. His wedding, to the woman he had sworn was just a colleague. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I might throw my phone across the room. For months after the breakup, I'd rehearsed imaginary confrontations, clever comebacks, dramatic exits. Now the universe had handed me a front row seat to the final act. I told myself I wouldn't go. Then I told myself I'd go and be invisible. Then, somewhere between bitterness and pride, I decided I would go and look untouchable. That resolve lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th, I stood in my closet surrounded by dresses that suddenly felt too loud, too quiet, too desperate. I imagined walking in alone, imagined the pitying looks, the polite smiles. I imagined my ex's satisfied glance, the subtle relief that I had come single, small, easily dismissed. My stomach twisted. Work was my refuge that week. Long hours, endless meetings, numbers and forecasts that didn't ask me how I felt. I was still new at the company, 6 months in, and determined not to be known as that employee with the messy personal life. So when I found myself distracted during a late strategy meeting, I forced a smile and tried to focus on the screen. The CEO noticed anyway. He always did. That was his reputation. Not just brilliant, not just terrifyingly competent, but observant in a way that made people sit up straighter. When he asked, casually, "Everything all right?" the room went quiet in that respectful, nervous way it always did around him. I should have lied. I should have said I was tired. Instead, the truth slipped out, half joking, half exhausted. My ex is getting married. He invited me. I'm debating whether to show up and pretend I'm thriving. A few people chuckled politely. Someone murmured sympathy. The CEO tilted his head, considering, like I'd presented a business problem instead of a personal one. "Why pretend?" he asked. I shrugged. "Because showing up alone feels like losing twice." The words hung there longer than I intended. I realized too late how honest they were. Embarrassment crept up my neck. I started to backtrack, but he spoke again. "Unless," I said quickly, trying to diffuse the moment with humor, "you want to be my date." I meant it as a joke. A ridiculous, impossible joke. He was the CEO, powerful, private, rumored to never mix work and personal life. The idea of him attending a messy, emotionally charged wedding with one of his employees was absurd. He paused. Not the awkward pause of someone deciding how to let you down gently, but a thoughtful one. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes on me with an intensity that made my pulse jump. "What time?" he asked. Laughter rippled around the table, uncertain and nervous. I froze, convinced I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what time is the wedding?" He repeated calmly. "And where?" I felt heat flood my face. I was joking. "I'm not," he said, and smiled, just slightly, but enough to send a murmur through the room. "If you're comfortable with it." The meeting ended soon after, though I barely remember how. People filed out, whispering, glancing between us like they'd just witnessed a plot twist. I stayed seated, heart racing, convinced he'd reconsider once we were alone. He didn't. In his office, with the door closed, he reiterated the offer as if we were discussing a calendar invite. "Clear boundaries. One event. No expectations. You shouldn't have to face that alone," he added, quietly. I went home in a daze. Rationally, I listed reasons to say no. The gossip, the imbalance of power, the sheer insanity of it. Emotionally, I imagined walking into that vineyard with him beside me, calm and unbothered, and felt something unclench in my chest. So I said yes. The week leading up to the wedding felt unreal. I avoided office chatter, ignored texts from friends who'd somehow already heard rumors, and focused on breathing. The CEO, my date, was impeccable about boundaries. No flirtation, no personal questions. Just logistics, pickup time, dress code, a polite assurance that if I changed my mind, there would be no hard feelings. I almost did change my mind. Twice. But on the day of the wedding, when he arrived at my apartment exactly on time, the doubts vanished. He stood there in a tailored suit that looked like it had been designed specifically to make people forget how to speak. Not flashy, just precise, effortless. His presence filled the hallway without demanding attention, like gravity. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, suddenly aware of how loud my heartbeat was. The drive to the vineyard was quiet but comfortable. He didn't pry. I didn't overshare. When nerves crept in, he noticed and adjusted the music, rolled down the window, pointed out the view. Small kindnesses that steadied me. The venue was beautiful in a curated, expensive way. White flowers, soft lighting, the kind of place designed for perfect photos and controlled emotions. As soon as we stepped out of the car, heads turned. Whispers followed us like a breeze. I felt them register him first. Recognition, disbelief, then flick to me, curiosity sharpening. My ex spotted us near the entrance. His smile faltered. The bride's laughter froze for a fraction of a second when she saw who was on my arm. I didn't feel triumphant the way I'd imagined. I felt calm. We took our seats, second row from the front. People kept glancing back. I caught fragments of murmured speculation. The CEO sat beside me, composed, hands folded loosely, gaze forward. "You okay?" he murmured. I nodded. And I was. The music began. The ceremony started. I expected him to leave after the polite minimum, escort me in, make an appearance, then slip out discreetly. That had been the unspoken plan in my head. But he didn't move. As the officiant spoke, as my ex fumbled through vows that sounded rehearsed and hollow, the CEO stayed seated. Front row, unbothered, present. His arm rested lightly along the back of my chair, not touching, but there if I needed it. My ex glanced our way once. Then again. His voice wavered. I realized, then, that this wasn't about revenge or appearances anymore. It was about dignity, about not shrinking to fit a past that had already let me go. And as the vows continued, with the CEO beside me and the weight of the room subtly shifted, I understood something I hadn't expected at all. He hadn't come to perform. He'd come to witness. Part 2. After the vows ended, applause rippled through the vineyard, polite at first, then swelling into celebration. Chairs scraped back, guests stood, laughter returned in cautious waves. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath for far too long. The CEO didn't move immediately. He waited until the bride and groom turned to walk back down the aisle, then rose smoothly and offered me his arm. The gesture was simple, almost old-fashioned, but it sent a quiet message through the room. We were leaving together, not slipping away. As we walked past my ex, our eyes met. There was confusion there, and something else, regret, maybe, or the unsettling realization that the story he'd told himself about me had just unraveled. I didn't smile, I didn't frown, I simply kept walking. Outside, sunlight spilled across the terrace where champagne flutes waited on silver trays. The air buzzed, with chatter now, curiosity edging closer to boldness. People glanced at us, then quickly looked away when they caught his eye. "You did great," he said softly. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "Exactly." A server approached with drinks. He accepted one for himself, then paused, glancing at me. "Only if you want." I took the glass. My hands shook slightly, but not from sadness. From release. We stood near the edge of the terrace, away from the densest knot of guests. The bride's friends clustered nearby, whispering too loudly, stealing looks. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching a scene I'd already survived. "I thought you'd leave after the ceremony," I admitted. He smiled faintly. "I considered it. Then I saw how tense you were. Leaving would have felt like abandoning you mid-sentence." The words landed heavier than I expected. Before I could respond, my ex approached. Alone. His tie was slightly crooked, his confident ease nowhere to be found. "Hey," he said, nodding at me, then at the CEO. "Didn't expect this." "That makes two of us," I replied evenly. He laughed awkwardly. "So, how do you two know each other?" The CEO answered before I could. "We work together." "Oh." My ex blinked. "I didn't realize you were that kind of company." The implication hung there, clumsy and small. "I'm very proud of her work," the CEO said calmly. "She's exceptional." Something in my chest tightened. My ex flushed, mumbled congratulations, and retreated back into the crowd. I hadn't known how badly I'd needed someone to say that, out loud, without hesitation, until that moment. The reception unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Speeches, laughter, music drifting through the late afternoon. At some point, people stopped whispering and simply accepted our presence as fact. A few guests approached us directly, curiosity overriding discretion. How did you two meet? Are you visiting from out of town? You make a stunning couple. Each time, the CEO answered with polite brevity, never misleading, never correcting assumptions either. He never once let the conversation turn awkward. When I faltered, he stepped in smoothly, like he'd been doing it his whole life. We didn't dance. We didn't need to. We watched the sunset stain the sky pink and gold, stood side by side, and talked about inconsequential things, travel, books, the absurdity of wedding favors. Normal things. Safe things. At some point, the bride passed us. Our eyes met. There was no hostility there, just something brittle. She looked at me, then at him, and nodded once before walking on. I felt lighter than I had in months. When the evening began to cool, he leaned closer. Ready to go? Yes, I said, surprised by how sure I felt. The drive back was quieter than before, but warmer. The tension had dissolved into something gentler. Streetlights flickered past, reflections sliding across the windshield. Thank you, I said finally. For staying. He glanced at me, then back to the road. I wanted to. That admission lingered between us, unspoken questions blooming and settling all at once. He walked me to my door. For a moment, neither of us moved. The evening hummed softly around us. We should talk at work about boundaries, I said, practical instinct kicking in. He nodded. Of course. Then, after a beat, but outside of work, if you ever wanted to get coffee, no weddings, no exes, I'd like that. My heart skipped. I'd like that too. He smiled. The same restrained smile, but this time it felt personal. Real. As he turned to leave, I realized something that surprised me more than anything else that day. The wedding hadn't been the ending I'd feared. It had been a closing chapter. Clean. Final. And whatever came next, whether with him or simply with myself, I was finally stepping into it unafraid.